I knew he was different the moment he didn't look at my legs. Most men, when they walk into a place like the Velvet End, are chasing a fantasy, the kind that smells like bourbon and desperation. They glance, linger, possess with their eyes before they even speak. But him? He walked in like he'd already owned the world and was looking for a place to give it all away. No entourage, no swagger. Just a black tailored suit that made the club feel smaller, colder, more real. He sat at a table near the back, didn't order a drink, didn't reach for the laminated menu of champagne illusions. He just waited, like he knew I'd come to him. And I did. I was 28, good at pretending I was in control. Back then, I wore confidence like lipstick, red, smeared, and dangerous. I learned the art of survival in stilettos, how to make a man feel powerful while keeping my soul behind velvet ropes. But when I walked up to his table and asked if he wanted company, he said, "No dances, just sit." I raised a brow, thinking he was trying to play some power game. But he wasn't smiling. He wasn't trying to impress me. His voice was quiet. Not cruel, not cold, just tired. So I sat. "What's your name?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a plain white envelope across the table. I glanced at it. Thick, sealed, cash, obviously. But the weight of it made my stomach shift. "What's this?" I asked. 10,000, he said. "For your time, one night, just talk." I laughed, couldn't help it. I'd had men offer me money for far more and far less. But 10 grand just to talk? No strings? No touching? "What do you want to talk about?" I asked cautiously. He looked up at me. Then, really looked. His eyes were the color of a storm. Not dramatic like thunderclouds, but dull, bruised, endless. Something honest. That was the moment everything shifted. In a place where nothing was real, he didn't want to lie. The envelope sat between us like a loaded gun. $10,000. More money than I'd ever been handed at once, even during the best nights. And not for my body, not for the way I could move, or arch, or pretend to want. Just for my voice, my attention, my time. "You don't want anything else?" I asked again, careful now. He shook his head. "I want you to talk, about whatever you don't talk about." I didn't pick it up right away. Not the money, not the invitation. I let it sit there like it was contagious. There was a danger to this man, but not the kind I was used to. Not the sweaty, greedy danger of men trying to buy a fantasy. His danger was quieter, sharper, like he could see the edges of you and wanted to know where they cut. "What's your name?" I asked again, not expecting an answer. He smiled, the barest twitch of a mouth too practiced in restraint. "Names are for the living." I don't know why that gave me chills, but it did. Something about the way he said it, like he wasn't sure he counted anymore. Still, I picked up the envelope. My fingers trembled a little as I tucked it into my purse, then crossed my legs and leaned forward. "All right, mystery man, what do you want to know?" He didn't hesitate. "Do you remember who you were before you had to survive?" The question hit like a slap in a dark room. No one had ever asked me that. Not in this place. Not in this life. I was used to surface things. Where I'm from, how long I've danced, what I do when I'm not working. Scripted answers for men who never listened past cleavage and glitter. But this wasn't that. "Before I had to survive?" I echoed, slowly. "You make it sound like a switch flipped." He nodded. "Didn't it?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to. But he waited, silent and patient, like he had all night, like he wasn't here to be entertained. He was here to witness. So I told him about my mother. I don't know why I started there. Maybe because she was the first person I ever learned to lie for, or maybe because I hadn't said her name out loud in years. I told him about her pills, the way she stared out the window like the world owed her something, the way I used to count her breaths when she slept just to make sure she was still alive. I told him about leaving home with $34 and a duffel bag, how I ended up on a Greyhound headed west, chasing a city that promised everything but gave nothing for free. He listened. That's what struck me most. Not the questions, not the money. The way he listened, like I was telling him something sacred, like I mattered. And then he asked another, "What's something you never say out loud?" I should have walked away then. Should have taken the 10 grand and kept my soul, but I stayed. I stayed because no one had ever asked me that without expecting a show, without trying to own me after. So I told him I sometimes imagine walking into the ocean and not turning back, not because I want to die, but because I want to know what silence really feels like. His eyes didn't flinch. He didn't judge, just nodded, slowly, like he understood. And in that moment, I realized the money was never for the talking. It was for the silence after. Vegas is never quiet. Not really. Even at 3 a.m., it hums, air conditioners buzz, slot machines chirp, neon bleeds through blackout curtains. It's a city that doesn't know how to rest. But that night, something in the world stilled. Not outside, inside me. We sat in that private room, velvet walls, gold trim, a bottle of untouched champagne sweating on the table. The soundtrack of the city still pulsed just beyond the walls. Bass, laughter, seduction for sale. But around us it was still, like time had paused to make room for something honest. I kept waiting for him to shift, to break the spell. Men always do. They get curious or greedy or lonely in the kind of way that demands skin. But he didn't. He just kept asking questions like each one was a key, and he didn't care how long it took to unlock the truth. "Do you ever feel like you disappeared into your own life?" he asked. I looked at him. Really looked. The cuffs of his white shirt were undone, sleeves rolled up now. The suit was still impeccable, but he'd loosened the knot in his tie like he wanted to breathe again, like he wasn't used to it. "I think I disappeared the day I started lying with a smile," I said. He nodded once, then leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "Same." It wasn't a confession. It was a mirror. I'd never felt so seen and so unseen at once. We didn't talk about jobs or sex or money. We talked about silence, the kind you carry, the kind that builds in your chest until it hums like a second heartbeat. He told me he hadn't slept more than 3 hours in a night for over a year, that every time he closed his eyes, he saw people, faces he'd built empires on, then left behind. I didn't ask him who he was. He never offered, and somehow that made it easier to speak freely. We were two people with names but no context, strangers bound by a moment more intimate than anything I'd ever faked in a champagne room. "Do you regret anything?" I asked. His answer was so fast it scared me. "Everything!" That was when I realized something. He wasn't here to be saved. He wasn't looking for redemption. He'd already made peace with his past, or maybe just decided to let it rot quietly. He looked at me like I was the last real conversation he'd ever have, and God help me, let him. At one point I reached across the table without thinking, just placed my hand over his, not in flirtation, not in pity, just because I wanted to know if he was real. His skin was warm, steady, human, but he didn't move. didn't flinch, just let it happen. We stayed that way for a long moment. No words, no masks. The air between us thick with something unsayable. Right before dawn, he stood. I blinked like the spell had broken. He adjusted his cuffs, his collar, like he was getting ready to put the armor back on. "You leaving?" I asked, voice softer than I meant. He nodded. "It's time." I stood too, heart aching in a way I couldn't name. "Will I see you again?" He looked at me then, eyes dark and endless. "No, but you'll remember me." And then he left. No kiss, no phone number, no name. Just the ghost of something important slipping out the back door before the sun could catch him. And for the first time since I came to Vegas, I couldn't hear the city. 3 days later, I saw his face on the news. I was in line at the pharmacy, holding a cheap bottle of nail polish and thinking about nothing important, a rare luxury. The television behind the counter was tuned to CNN, sound off, subtitles crawling across the screen like ants on a dying fruit. But it was his face. I knew it instantly. That same calm intensity, the same eyes that never looked away when they should have. Only now the headline below it read, "Billionaire tech mogul James Kessler declared dead amid rumors of final disappearance." My knees went weak, not from shock exactly, more like confirmation. I had known, somehow, that he wasn't normal. That night hadn't been about sex or boredom or buying companionship. It had been something else. Something I still couldn't explain, even as the facts spilled across the screen. He wasn't just wealthy. He was the man behind half the software the casinos on the Strip still used. A corporate ghost who hated interviews, avoided public appearances, and made more money selling silence than some nations made exporting oil. The world called him elusive, private, visionary, but I'd seen something else. I'd seen a man trying to disappear from himself. They said he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer just 6 months prior, that he'd begun selling off assets, transferring control of his companies to people he trusted. The word estate was used a lot. Legacy, charitable trust. And then, just like that, gone. No funeral, no witnesses. Just a single unsigned statement from his lawyer saying that James Kessler had passed quietly on his own terms. But not before a final night in Las Vegas. Not before me. The envelope with the $10,000 was still in my closet, untouched. I hadn't even unwrapped the paper band holding the bills together. Not out of guilt, but because it felt like proof that I hadn't imagined him, that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing in a fever of late-night smoke and loneliness. I went home and sat on the edge of my bathtub, letting the faucet drip into silence. And I cried, not because I missed him. You can't miss someone you never really had. I cried because someone who had everything, had still needed that night, needed me. And because part of me wondered if I had said the wrong thing, or not enough, or too much. They speculated endlessly on the news. Maybe he'd faked it. Maybe he was in some clinic in Switzerland or on a private island sipping detox smoothies until the inevitable. But none of the theories mattered. Because I knew that night wasn't about escaping the world. It was about leaving it with one last piece of truth. His goodbye had been honest, but his death, that was the lie. He didn't vanish to die. He vanished to be forgotten by the world, except by me. And I still see him every time a man tries to buy me with money instead of curiosity. Every time I'm asked to smile and pretend. Every time I sit in silence and wish someone would ask me something real. They called him untouchable. That was the word they used again and again in the obituaries, dressed up as business profiles. untouchable, as if that was a compliment, as if building an empire meant something holy, as if solitude was a prize. But I saw what they didn't. James Kessler didn't want to be untouchable. He wanted to feel something just once more before the machines of wealth and legacy finished devouring the last of him. And somehow, for reasons I'll never understand, he chose me. I started reading everything I could about him, not because I was obsessed, but because I was angry. The world had turned him into a myth, a cold genius, a man who hadn't been seen in public in 5 years, but still shaped everything we touched. They talked about the mergers, the backroom deals, the hostile takeovers, about how he fired half his board over email and refused to use a phone, about the empire he'd handed off weeks before his death, but they never talked about loneliness or regret or the way he stared at me in that club, like I was the last human connection he'd allow himself. I kept going back to that night in my head, rewinding it like old tape. The questions he asked, the way he never tried to impress me, the way he let silence stretch between us like it mattered. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought about until then. He never once said why he chose me, not even hinted at it. I wasn't the most beautiful dancer at the Velvet End. I wasn't the youngest or the most in demand. I didn't offer VIP packages or bottle service or the kind of fantasy men lined up to pay for. I was the girl who read Bukowski on her break, who brought her own tea to the dressing room and didn't bother with false lashes. I'd been told I had an intimidating calm. Maybe that's what he needed. Someone who wouldn't beg for his secrets, but also wouldn't flinch if he handed them over. Maybe he didn't want to be remembered. But part of him needed to be seen, once, truly seen, not for what he built, but for what he feared, what he lost, what he buried under the weight of always being right. And when I think back to that night, to the sharp press of his words, to the quiet way he held his stillness like a weapon, I realize something awful. He wasn't trying to vanish. He was trying to confess, but not in a church, not to a priest, to a woman paid to listen and not judge, to a stranger he wouldn't have to lie to someone who couldn't ruin him because she didn't want anything but the truth, and he gave it, not all at once, but piece by piece, between sips of nothing and stares that felt like they bruised the air. And me? I didn't save him, but I witnessed him, and that, I think, was what he came for. Sometimes I think he never existed. It's easier that way. To believe he was a dream made of silk shadows and low whispers, a fever conjured by neon lights and too many years spent pretending nothing touched me. But then I close my eyes, and there he is, not as a billionaire, not as a myth, as a man, sitting across from me in a room too quiet for Las Vegas, his hands still, his eyes asking questions no one else ever dared. That's the part one can't forget. Not his money, not the mystery, the way he looked at me, like I wasn't an act, like I wasn't survival in heels, like maybe I was the only person in the world who could still recognize what pain looked like beneath a polished surface. I wonder if he chose me because I knew how to vanish too. Because dancers like me, we learn to disappear in plain sight, to move like desire, to smile like nothing hurts. We become mirrors for other people's fantasies, their grief, their loneliness, their need to be adored without being known. But he didn't want adoration. He wanted witnessing, and for one night, I gave it. People ask me why I never spent the money. They don't ask directly. They just glance at my tiny apartment, the secondhand furniture, the way I still fold singles like I might need to count them someday. But the money? It's still in the envelope, still in the closet, under an old blanket that smells like lavender and resignation, not because I think he'll come back for it, because it's not mine. It was never payment. It was a receipt, a proof of transaction. I gave him my attention. He gave me his truth. And we both walked away with something too fragile to name. I never told anyone his name, not when I found out, not even now. Because it doesn't matter who he was out there. What matters is who he was with me. A man dying too slowly to scream. A soul unraveling with every dollar he gave away. And now, all these years later, I still wonder what I was to him. A last confession? A mirror? A mistake? But the truth is, I don't need to know. Because I know what he was to me. He was the first person who didn't ask me to lie, who didn't want to touch me or save me or own me. He just wanted to be known before he disappeared. And when I close my eyes, I still see the moment he stood, adjusted his sleeves, and said, "No, but you'll remember me." He was right. I do. I always will.